Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and today we are going to be recapping maybe the most insane race that we've had in a very long time of the Australian Grand Prix. Shreya, I'm so excited to have you here. I had to just catch myself because people have been critiquing the way I say Grand Prix, but when I say Grand Prix, I feel like an asshole. So it's like, which one's right? Which one's the correct one?
I think it's honestly accent though, isn't it? Because I feel like Grand Prix in my accent doesn't sound right. So
exactly. But when I say Grand Prix, it sounds like I'm not at least falling over my mouth. When I have to like think through it and be like Grand Prix, I feel like I'm doing a fake accent. And I think it's so funny. Like I just don't sound right. Sorry guys, I'm doing my best. Anyway, very special guest on the podcast today. My good old internet pal and wonderful F1 content creator Shreya is here to help me break this down. Please welcome Shreya to the podcast.
Hello, it is wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I always find these like podcast meetings so fun. That's why I've been enjoying having other content creators on for the race recaps, because I'm like, I see you every day, but like I've never had a conversation with you except for over DM for, you know, like a couple minutes at a time. And now we get to be real human beings.
Yeah, social media is so weird like that, I think, because I feel like I see so many people every day that I just don't really know. But here we are.
Here we are. So, you know, did we just become best friends? Maybe. It's possible.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Well, we have such a race to get through. I've been like, normally these last two races, I've been like, what are we going to talk about? My God, we have a lot to talk about today. Before we get into the race though, just so that everybody can get to know you, I am curious how you got into F1.
So yeah, I started watching it when I was really young with my dad, as many girls do. And then I stopped for a while. And then I got back into it recently, actually. I don't want to be the one to say this, but like through Drive to Survive, I got back into it again. Nobody come for me. But yeah, and then the last few years, it's been great because it's now kind of like my passion instead of just like something I did with my dad growing up.
I think the people who have a problem with people who got into it with Drive to Survive are just bananas to me. Like, it's like being upset at someone for getting into the Olympics because they're televised. Like, what
exactly.
do you know?
I just don't understand. I mean, I get it a little bit if you only watch Drive to Survive and not the races, but like,
sure,
if I'm doing both,
what's the problem?
What's the problem? Yeah.
I don't know. I think to me, I'm like, you can objectively say, sure, Drive to Survive doesn't cover everything. You just can't cover everything. And you're always going to cover the more dramatic beats and potentially cut things to make them look more dramatic than they were in the space. But to me, I'm like, the thing that gets people into sports is like a personal connection to it, whether that's your personal connection to a family member who's into the sport and you like sit down with that person every week and you watch a game or you watch a race, or it's like the drama of like a lot of people got into football because of Marshawn Lynch, because he does a lot of like fun reality TV and different stuff like that. So you get it connected to Marshawn Lynch and you're like, oh, he plays football. Like, I'd like to cheer for him. You have like the Taylor Swift effect. There are so many different personal ways to get into the sport. But once you start watching the sport, then you are a fan. Like, I just don't understand this energy of like, anyway. So if you're listening and you enjoyed Drive to Survive, that's fine. This is a safe place for you.
We welcome you.
Okay, so then the other big question, just so we all know our biases going into this coverage, what team do you support? Who are your drivers?
So I actually would say I kind of support everyone a little bit, but I have my favorites. I'd say McLaren and Ferrari are like my teams right now, which is it's a bit depressing being a fan of both teams right now, I have to say. Then drivers, I'd say both McLaren drivers, then Charles and Alex are probably my top four.
It's a good top four.
It's a bit, yeah.
You've had a very eventful weekend.
Yeah, I really did. Everyone was going through something, I have to say. I actually don't know who your favorites are, if you want to also say that quickly.
Yeah, I'll say it. Why not? Lewis is my favorite driver and like always will be, no matter where he drives, even after he retires, I feel. So like for me, that's that. Like up until last season, really like in the Valtteri Bottas and Lewis era, that was like, I was such a Mercedes girl. But how everything has fallen apart has really made me not enjoy that. And also once Valtteri left, I was like, I don't really love this as a team anymore. It's not an entire piece that works really well for me anymore. So Lewis, I will follow anywhere. I have also always enjoyed the Ferrari team, as depressing as being a Ferrari fan is. And I really like the way McLaren runs their shop. So I hope Lando gets his win one day and all of these different things, but I actually like how Zach runs McLaren. Like, I think he runs a good team. And so as a team whole, I think it's interesting to watch. There we go. Now everybody listening, you know where we're coming from as we dive in.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get into the race because we have so much to cover. There's so much that happened. And when I make my notes for this, and I shared them with you, and just like I was sitting down to write my bullet points after the race, and I was like, the first bullet point is just holy shit. Like,
honestly, I saw that and I was like, yeah, that represents the race we just watched.
It was insane. I will say, funny little anecdote, because Max, as we all know at this point, DNF'd on lap 3. I was at a birthday party, like with the intent to leave just in time to get to the race. And it was at a bar and they had TVs on, and I did the like 45-year-old dad golf thing and was like, could you turn Formula 1 on the TV? And they said yes. Like, I got them to change the channel because it was just like highlights from March Madness. Like, the games were already over. They turned the channel and it said ESPN Formula 1 on the guide or whatever. And I thought they would like have like the pre-race on, and realized I was like, oh, I have to leave because it wasn't working correctly, because it was the Pillow Fighting Championships. It's literally called PFC. It's an entire, this is a tangent, but it's an entire league of like guys who are in like a boxing ring holding a like specially designed pillowcase full of 2.2 pounds of foam, and they are hitting each other in like these insane spin moves. It was the most bonkers things I've ever seen. And I was like, I don't think the Formula 1 race is coming on. I think I have to leave.
That is crazy. I honestly, any other race, and I would have rather have watched that. But today is the exception.
I literally was like, if I miss a couple minutes of the race, what's going to happen? It's just
Wow.
I got home just in time. Like, literally, I did miss the first lap, and I got home and was like, the TV was already on, and I got home and I like dashed upstairs and I was like, what is happening? And then I thought maybe I was being pranked, or that I had like hit my head trying to leave the bar and someone was going to wake me up in 6 years and be like, you've been in a coma. But no, Max Verstappen DNF'd on lap 3.
He truly did. It was crazy. I remember I watched the first lap and I was like, oh, that was quite calm for Australia. Nothing really happened. And then we hit the second lap and I was like, oh, here we are. The race has started.
Did you watch by yourself, or were you, because it was really early for you?
Yeah, I watched in bed by myself. 4 a.m. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it would have been like just completely alone, like to watch it. And also it was like, basically we do know what happened now. It was that Max's brake on the rear right was just engaged and stuck, since it sounded like he said from basically lights out, like he couldn't get it to disengage. And so obviously he was, struggling to drive it with just your entire right rear locked up. But then additionally, because the brake was stuck, it caught fire basically by the time he got back. And I don't know if you saw I guess everyone did, but my feed had the footage when he was coming into the pit lane.
Oh yeah.
And it just,
you could see the like explosion.
Yes.
Oh, it was so scary. Oh my God.
I'm glad that situation, we had so many dangerous situations actually in this race. And I'm glad that situation, he managed it well enough to know I've got to go in, like, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Like, we had to start with that because I feel like anybody who's pressed play on this episode was like, they're going to talk about Max. We have to talk about Max. We've gotten the elephant out of the room, I suppose. We've popped the bubble. But I do want to go back and talk about the stuff that happened before the race, because this weekend was just so jam-packed with so many things that happened, and so much, honestly, like interpersonal drama, inter-team drama, and like excitement, honestly. So we have to talk about it all. The two big things that happened pre-race are the fact that Carlos Sainz came back 2 weeks, literally to the day of his appendicitis, and got back in the car. Were you surprised by that? Did you feel like he needed to take a minute?
I don't know. I thought had it been any other year, maybe, but because he obviously, as he says in his own words, he is jobless next year. I think he definitely was trying to get back in that car as fast as possible. So I did expect to see him back, I'd say. But yeah, what did you think?
Kind of the same. I was like, I expected to see him back, but I was stressed about it. I think when he got out of the car, they were interviewing him after practice. He was like, yeah, like, if I don't feel good after, practice, I won't race. And I was like, oh man, I'm stressed. I just feel like your stitches are not meant to be put under this amount of G-forces. I always worry about like the idea in sports that you're supposed to get back as fast as you can without healing. And like comparatively, this is so different. But when I was growing up, I played basketball and I have like body ankle problems still to this day from going back before injuries were properly healed because like, oh, the team needs you. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, they didn't need me. It was high school basketball. They do need Carlos.
No, I'm sure they needed you too.
but yeah, I think it's like I always have just like a little bit of stress of like, okay, recovery time is so important for longevity of your career and just like your life afterwards. But obviously he was just fine. So
Yeah. I did hear though, they make appendicitis surgery sound like way more crazy than it actually is. And apparently it's
Really?
not even that like invasive or anything.
Mhm.
So maybe that's why he's back.
Fair enough.
Don't know.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm glad he came back. Was stressed.
Yeah.
Happy that it worked out, but very, very excited that he was able to make it back.
Me too.
The other big one that we have to talk about is the Williams situation because we had Alex crash in free practice 1 and there were so many factors that went into this. How did you feel about it?
I think like it really depends on who you're a fan of. Because for me, like obviously I'm an Alex fan. Like I really want him to race. But then equally, like it's probably one of the most unfair decisions we've had recently. Like I understand why they did it because there's such a big disparity between their drivers that they have to take the shot of getting points. But like to take the driver that crashed and to give him like a free reward. And then to take a car away from a driver that didn't even do anything wrong, I think is a little bit outrageous.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too like political on it, but like I feel like it was a bit unfair.
Yeah, I think that so the debate of it I think is so hard. Alex also crashed in this same turn last year at the same race. And a lot of people were like, if he crashes in the race itself, it's just so frustrating to see. And obviously, thankfully, Alex made it all the way through, but he didn't score points. And not only did he not, like, when you look at the race results, you're like, oh, he almost did. He was at 11th, but we also had multiple DNFs. So of like 2 of the best racers on the grid. So it's like, okay, so
I don't know. I did think about this and I was like, there were times where he was being overtaken that I did think he could have prevented. And I think Logan watching that from the garage was probably a bit hard to see for him.
Yeah.
So.
The part that was hard for me is that ultimately I actually kind of felt like the problem, it wasn't either of the drivers' fault. It was the fact that Williams doesn't have what they should have at this point in the season. They should have a spare chassis. And to not have one is frustrating. And like James even acknowledged that. He was like, it's not a fair decision. And I do think ultimately, despite the fact that Alex didn't end up scoring points, and I think you're right, there were places he could have driven a little bit stronger. I feel like it still makes sense. Like, would Logan have gotten further? I don't know that I can say that with confidence.
Yeah. That is true.
So it's like I can't say that it was wrong to get a P11 when I don't know that Logan would have got a P11 or gotten into the points. And I can't say that with my whole chest.
Yeah.
But I do think I'm curious to see if it'll have a lasting effect on Logan's confidence in a positive or a negative way, because to some degree, I kind of hope, and this is just me being overly hopeful, that it turns into his sort of revenge era the same way that Carlos has been driving with like his whole chest ever since he found out that he won't be coming back to Ferrari. I'm like, maybe this ends up being what Logan needs. Like, you have so many people rallying around him on social media. He had so many comments of people being like, let him drive, free him. Like,
yeah, even the like cheer in the crowd when they showed him on TV, there you could hear the like visible cheer from everyone. I think that's got to be motivating.
Yeah,
a little bit.
I'm like, does he have like a bigger fan base after this that hopefully kind of just makes him feel like, okay, now I have people to drive for? Because I do wonder how hard it is to not necessarily be like, I don't want to say he's the least popular driver on the grid, but I do feel like he doesn't have the advantage of having like a whole country behind him. Like, the sport is much smaller here in America, and with other drivers, like British drivers in general, or drivers from Spain or from Mexico, they have like a country rallying around them. There's a built-in desire for that. And I do think American fans are very much like supportive of Logan in the sense of like, we're always going to cheer for him because he's American, but he's not, I would say, like, I didn't list Logan as my favorite driver. There's not this like obligation to care for him or to cheer for him.
Yeah.
And I wonder if like from this, does he end up getting that support that he might want?
I hope so. I think we saw with Ollie Behrman as well, like when he did that one race, you
Mhm.
saw so many more of the drivers interact with him, and like he gained a lot more fans from that singular race than I think Logan really gained in a whole season.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like there's definitely somewhat of like a Europe bias, but hopefully this is what turns it around.
Yeah.
I'd love to see Logan be someone that's like cheered on by a lot of people and like get the career that he really could have.
I feel like people are rooting for him, and I feel like it was nice to see so many, like, there was an excitement of seeing fans show up with signs for him that were specific to the fact that, like, he couldn't drive, he should have been able to, and I hope that this ends up being enough of a motivation for him to, like, want to outdrive Alex. Can he do it? We won't know until he tries, but I hope it doesn't go the opposite direction, which is, like, no one wants me here, and
I don't know. I think we've seen a lot with James Bowles. I remember I actually went to their fan zone in London last year.
Mhm.
And the way he spoke about Logan and like bringing up rookies, I feel like he really does have that passion to make Logan as good as he can be. So maybe we'll see it. I hope so. I don't know.
I hope so. The thing is, I will say he had way more class than I think even just other drivers would have had in the situation. Like, definitely more than me. I'd have been crying everywhere. I'd have been
Honestly,
like,
I would have, I don't want to say it, but I would have broken that car. Like, if I'm not driving, no one's driving. Like,
I think it is so funny that Max said that and then his car
yeah.
broke, to be honest with you, because I
I
was
didn't even put that together actually until you just said that. Oh
he
God.
said, he literally was like, if it the quote was like, if it happened to me, I would have flattened my car so that no one could have driven it.
Yeah.
And then he was like, I would have been on a plane home. And I think obviously you can see the difference, because when he said that, obviously a joke, but I also believe it. Like, I do believe that that's how he feels.
Mhm.
And it's funny to me because it's like, okay, he said that with his whole chest, and then 3 laps in, the car was like, I gotta flatten, can't do this.
Oh dear, the karma came for him, honestly. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, wild, right?
Oh.
Speaking things into existence. Oh, and also, I will say just a small thing. I do feel partially responsible for this whole situation because at like 9 o'clock last night, or the night before the race, less than 24 hours before Max's DNF, I put in my little group chat manifesting a Max P19. So that's all I have to say about that.
Maybe next race you could manifest like Charles winning or Lando winning or something, you know, get us some results maybe.
I was looking back at my Instagram story because I saw that message and I was like, oh my God, am I a witch? And then I was looking back at my Instagram story, and right after qualifying, when Checo got his penalty and dropped to 6th, it put Lando up into P3. And I put on my Instagram story the picture of that result, and I said, Carlando podium, question mark. What can I say?
You manifested it. Oh my God.
If I had been a little more specific, we could have had something different. I should have said Carlando 1-2 or Lando first win. There were a lot of options, but
Yeah.
I'll just have to be, if I had known I had this power, I would have been more specific.
Well, now we know. For Japan, Lando P1 is incoming. I'm expecting
It's
it
coming.
now.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I'll do my best. I will say everything comes at a sacrifice, and we'll never know what that'll be. So we have to be safe.
That is true. Can't be asking for things that aren't going to happen, can we?
It's true. The balance of the
Yeah.
universe must remain. For everything that you take, you have to give something back. So
Mhm.
the other thing was qualifying was absolutely bonkers to me. Ironically, was like, oh, I guess qualifying is where all the excitement is now, because the race is always going to be Max winning, and then the universe proved me wrong. But the big wild ones, you said at the beginning of this that you are a Ferrari fan and there's pain that comes with this, but I think this year might be a good year to be a Ferrari fan.
I hope so. I really do. I think the thing with Ferrari though is even last year they had a car that was really good on the single lap, and every qualifying I would get my hopes up. Charles on pole, I'd be like, yes, it's happening. We are so back. And then we were never back. So,
It's fair. Yeah.
I think it's definitely better than like, say, if I were to be a Haas fan.
Sure.
Like there's positives in being a
Yeah.
Ferrari fan for sure. But yeah, they have very good one lap pace.
Yeah.
I would just, not so good strategy.
Fair. I think I will say this season so far, we're only 3 races in, but strategy does feel a little bit better this time around.
It does feel improved, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. It's actually not as horrendous as it used to be, which is great.
I'm wondering, like, with the shift of preparing for Lewis, there have been new hires and Fred has been making changes. And so I do wonder if some of those changes that are being made for next year are already affecting strategy. Because I hate to say it in this way, but like the last couple of races have been like, oh, we just have like these are normal calls. These are real calls. Come in when you're
Yeah.
supposed to come in. Like,
There
change
was
these
and
tires.
today they said like, oh, we're on plan A, and I was like, wow, we're not on like plan F as usual. We're on plan A, which it's always good to hear.
Yeah.
It's great
They
to
did
hear.
say at one point early on, or it was like maybe, I think it was like 15 or 16 laps in, I did see them say, Carlos, we're doing plan B. And I said, why? What could that be?
What happened in between? You never
No
know.
plans.
In that big book of Ferrari strategies they have, you never know what they're going to bring out. So
it could be plan Q, and I never want to see that one, you know? So
oh, absolutely not. If I hear that, I'm turning off the race. I can't be dealing with that. Dear.
But yeah, I don't know. Fingers crossed. I would honestly love to see Ferrari end up having a good year. Like it would be nice for this to be a good year for Ferrari. And also, I would like to see Carlos go out on a really high note because he's got to go somewhere, and there's no way he won't go somewhere. But I'd love to see him go in a way that it's like, okay, cool, great work.
I think honestly, like even if the rest of the season is like a big Ferrari downpour, it's fine, because this time when he had his appendicitis and then he won a race, I think that's enough of an achievement. Do you know
That's
what I
fair.
mean?
Yeah.
I feel like at this point he should be happy. I'm happy with him.
Yeah. You
All
know
is
what?
well.
Just go home. It's over now.
Yeah. End it on high. We're
Be
good
like,
where we are.
guys, my tummy hurts. I can't come to the rest of the races, but if someone could get me a contract, I'll be back
Sorry.
in full form.
Yeah, I'll be back. Better car, hopefully. We'll see.
Fingers crossed. We'll see. So we had one other upset, which was Lance Stroll knocking Lewis out of Q3, which personally, it was not a good weekend for me, if we're being honest. I enjoyed myself, but only through the pain, you know? The one thing, I defended Lance on the podcast last week as well, and I'm going to defend him again. People always are like, he got knocked out by Lance of all people, or like by Stroll of all people. And I'm like, he has a better car right now, though. Like what can I do about that? He's not this horrible like driver who crashes every race. He's kind of always the butt of the joke. And I think he's a better driver than Lewis. No, obviously, but I do think right now the Aston's a much better car. Like, I don't even know what we're doing with the Mercedes. Like
Mercedes.
Fix the car.
I don't understand how Toto's let it get this bad, honestly.
So this one thing that I am kind of curious about, which like I think hasn't been covered very much, but it did come up in post-practice coverage this weekend, is I've been wondering like, how is George consistently outperforming Lewis? Because just objectively speaking, whether you are a George fan or not, he is not a better driver than Lewis Hamilton. It's just not the case. It's the same way you can say that about any team pairing. There's always a driver that is going to be a little bit stronger than the other. I don't understand. Like I have not been able to understand how George is just consistently putting in a better pace. And so it was after free practice 2, Lewis literally just had an abysmal run. Like I don't think he'd ever been that low in anything. And they were talking about his car, and basically they did come out and say that like they were running different setups and that they were experimenting on Lewis's, and that it didn't give the pace that they hoped it would, and so they were going to change it back. And so now I'm very curious how different these setups have been and why it's happening in this way and why we're always testing things on Lewis.
I think the thing is they do tend to test on Lewis more because they think he's more of a bit of a controversial take, but more of like a stable driver, so they can see the effects a bit better. But then the same thing is like I swear I read somewhere their simulator, they realized it doesn't work. So this whole time, the reason that what their simulator's saying hasn't matched their like on-track pace is because it was actually broken, which is insane from a Formula One team that dominated for like 7 years. Absolutely insane.
Well, and so then obviously the reason why Lewis DNF'd was they did come out and say that there was just a power unit failure. That is also one of the scariest things that I can't imagine being like, if you were to be a Formula One driver, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, obviously, and there are a lot of things that could be really scary about it. But to me, the power unit fail is one of the more scary. Like, I don't even know that I can say it's like scarier than the idea of crashing, but it kind of is, because you're going full speed and then everything stops and you have to try to not get hit by the people who are also driving at full speed coming around a turn. The power unit is completely, like as we saw with Lewis, there's no warning. It just stops. just failed. Like if you were on the freeway driving at 80 miles an hour, this is such a lower stakes level of it, but you're going 80 miles an hour and then your car just goes, oh no, no more gas. And you stop in the midst of people going 80 to 100 around you. Like it would be terrifying. It'd be so
No,
terrifying because
honestly.
you're just trusting everyone else to not hit you.
I think that's the scariest part of Formula One driving. Isn't even the car itself, it's everyone around you because everyone is doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he did manage to get the car off track without incident and be removed without safety car. So I do think sometimes we get into this debate of like experience over youth, like over skill. Like we saw a lot of that conversation last race with Ollie Behrman, with this conversation of like, do these experienced drivers, these older drivers need to start retiring to make space? But certain things like these moments I think are so small, but they are sort of a testament to why experience does matter, because if it's your first time at this track, how do you manage it? How do you know those
No,
things? Like,
exactly.
you know?
But I also think with experience, there comes a time where it is just enough and it is time to retire. And I think there are definitely certain drivers on the grid, like, don't want to name any names, but there's definitely certain drivers there that maybe it is time and maybe it is time for new talent. But like experience, I don't know. I feel like with legends like Lewis, obviously, I don't think there'll be a time for quite some time.
Yeah.
You know, we have Alonso. It really depends on the driver, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. I will say with Lewis, when I went to COTA last year at the driver engagement, he made this comment that made everybody so stressed because he was like talking about, I think the question was like, do you have like athletes you admire or something like that? I can't remember what the question was that spurred this answer, but he was talking about like how he's gotten the chance to become friends with some of his childhood heroes or like these different massive athletes, and casually dropped that like he texts with Serena Williams and that Michael Jordan had just texted him that morning. And I was like, okay, we get it. You're cool. You're living my dream.
Honestly, he's living the life.
Like
Well,
truly.
not in terms of Formula One, but outside of F1, he's
outside of
living the
F1,
life.
he's doing great. So, but yeah, he was talking about how Michael Jordan had texted him that morning and how his like, I've been asking for them for like advice of what happens like after you retire, and the audience just went dead silent because he's kind of talking about like, how do you set life up so that you have something to do and like all these different things. And he was kind of talking about his passions, and everyone was just like, did you just say that you're retired? Like you're one day you're not going to drive? And he did have to calm everyone down and was like, I think I've got at least, 5 years left in me. So in my heart, I'm like trying to prepare myself for, I guess 4 years from now, because that would have been.
That would be a day. Yeah.
Yeah, there will
The
be a
day
day
that Lewis leaves. Do you hear this debate of like, is Lewis Hamilton bigger than Formula One as a sport? And it's very much like, do you think once he retires, whether they'll lose a big part of their audience? Because a lot of people are just sticking around for him.
I do think so. I will be bold enough to say, because I think there are people who've come in. I think also the culture of Formula One is going to change when Lewis leaves, if something doesn't change before he leaves, if someone else doesn't kind of take over the things that he finds to be very important. And I think there is like a moral center that Lewis brings to the track that I'm not saying that other drivers don't have a moral compass by any means, but I think Lewis is probably the only driver who puts it first, as opposed to it being kind of a thought sometime when someone reminds you to have one.
Yeah.
If some of the culture of Formula One doesn't change before Lewis retires, I think the loss of Lewis's voice is going to cause feelings for certain fans that they don't feel welcomed anymore into the sport. Like, I think Lewis is probably a large portion of why certain fans feel like it's a safe space for them, or it's a place that they can be in. And I think when we lose that, I do think if in between now and then someone hasn't taken up at least a portion of that, I don't know that those fans still feel welcome here.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Like, he's always going out of his way to advocate for everyone, but then who is going to do that when he leaves?
Yeah, I agree. And again, it comes from having the ability to do that, like the standing to do that. Like Lewis can say what he wants and not worry that something's going to change in his career. And I think what's going to be hard about that is like, if you have another black driver come in, they're not going to have that same standing at that point. like even if we were able to see one come in within the next 3 years, which I don't even think we have someone that we're looking at that could be that person, which is frustrating. But even if we did have that, I don't know that you can say that that person is going to have the same ability to make that change, that standing.
Yeah,
It's hard.
for sure.
Oh, now I'm sad.
That got a
He's
bit
still
deep.
here.
Yeah, not yet. The time is not yet.
Yeah. So, okay. The other thing that we have to talk about is just the pace of this race. If this was the first race you watched, you would have such a different perspective of what you think a Formula One race feels like. It was nonstop speed. I didn't have a moment to like look away from the screen, to grab a cup of coffee, to do anything. Like, it was nonstop action. And like you said, like Australia last year was even more insane than this one was. And I'm curious if this was your preference when you watch races. Like, do you like watching them when they're this intense, or do you prefer a little bit more like the middle stretch? There's not a lot going on and eventually they'll catch up.
I think honestly, because this one was so early, I needed it to be like this. Otherwise I would have fallen. If it was a classic like Max is ahead by 30 seconds, I'd be asleep by lap 10. There was no way. But the moment I realized it was going to be an intense race, like I love to see racing action. I think there is a bit of a balance though between whether a race is exciting because there's reliability issues or whether it's exciting because of actual racing. Because I think like when I didn't actually watch Bahrain, but there was a lot of like reliability issues at Bahrain, which made it exciting for certain people, but I'm not sure that it would be the same for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like good overtakes. I hate a DRS train. It gets so boring. Every time we get one, I'm like, oh, here we go again. But yeah, I'd say my preference for sure is like exciting racing action. Yeah. That's how I'm going to put it.
I'm curious then on that point, if you prefer like overtakes and exciting racing action, how did you feel about Vegas last year? Because that was a race that people were not like excited about, but then it ended up being nonstop action, like a lot of overtakes.
I think Vegas, honestly, was so shocking because we spent like months being like, oh, this is going to be an awful race. It's not going to be fun at all. It's going to be like no hate to Miami, but I did think it would be like Miami, which is quite boring every year. But no, I loved Vegas. Honestly, it was so fun. And because it was so unexpected, I think that made it a lot better.
Yeah.
Because no one was really expecting anything. But then this year, I don't know if it will be as fun because now we've got like an expectation in our minds. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I agree. Couple things though, in terms of like speed. One team we can say was not moving at a fast pace were Steak Kick Sauber, however we want to say it. Depends on what country you're in and their gambling laws. Technically in Australia, they can't use the stake name, which is another weird, interesting thing that's going on. But yeah, their pit stops are so stressful to me.
God, I honestly don't. I heard it was a problem with the actual design of the car, which is why they can't get it on fast enough. But it just like when you look at it from a viewer's perspective, to watch them have like a 50-second pit stop, that was outrageous. And then again today, I don't even know how long do you know how long it was, their long one today?
So I don't know how long the stop was itself, but I do know that they got a fine for the pit stop because there was like a wheel nut rolled into the fast lane during Valtteri's stop. And I think basically what it sounds like from Steak is that, and every time I call them Steak, I feel like that feels wrong. It's not. It's their name.
I honestly don't. I still call them Sauber.
Do you?
Sauber makes sense. Yeah. Steak, I don't know.
I call them the Shigo team because their car. I will say, like, every time the pit stops happen and everybody runs in, I'm like, they are wearing Shigo outfits. Like, that is impossible, and I love it. I love it. But yeah, it seems like it's just a design flaw. And the thing that is wild to me is that it really sounds like they still don't have a solution. So this is probably going to continue. We're just going to continue seeing them unable to get the wheel nuts off. That does not seem like something they should test before they
I was literally going to say, how do you not, in all your testing and all the like building of the car, not realize? I think it's weird as well because they, like, when they build the car, they obviously put the wheels on. So would they not notice? Like, I don't know how that happens.
It just seems like the one thing that you would be able to be like, oh, I don't think that's the right choice. We should change that.
Yeah. Was there like, did it need a massive design change from what it was last year? Like, what was the need to even have
new nuts? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you know, fingers crossed for them. I hope they figure it out because otherwise I think we're just going to see the same thing over and over again. But
yeah.
it is a fight for last between them and Alpine. So
Alpine, another crazy team. Honestly, they were quiet this in Australia. I feel like they were very
yeah,
quiet.
I thought Esteban was about to DNF at one of the pit stops. It looked like he had like smoke kind of coming out. I really
Oh
thought
yeah,
he was out, but he ended up finishing. So good for him.
good for him.
Okay, so then we also had like some team dynamic factors this week, and I am kind of curious about your feelings on a couple of them. The first I think we should talk about is Oscar and Lando, because I think a lot of people were devastated by that team order swap because Oscar, it's his home race. Like people would have really liked to have seen him on the podium. How did you feel about that call, especially as a McLaren fan?
I think the thing is with me is I'm very like biased in the moment. I
Mhm.
remember I actually posted a video about it when it happened and I was like, oh my God, like how could they let Lando pass? This is so sad. But then when you really think about it, there was a pace difference between the two of them.
Yeah.
And it did make sense. I think the strategy, like it was a bit crazy, but like it was very smart in the grand scheme of things when they did the whole, they had Oscar undercut him and then they had Lando undercut him and then they did
Yeah.
the whole thing. Because it ended up that they did manage to keep George behind and try and catch Charles. So it was worth it for sure. But like as an Oscar fan, you know, it's Melbourne, it's his home race, and he wasn't on the podium.
Yeah.
I did want to like point out at the end though, during the virtual safety car, I think he put like a 20-second gap between him and Lando.
Oh, did he
And
really?
I don't know what happened. I saw the final finishing times and there's like a 20-second gap between them. So maybe there was something wrong.
Yeah, with
Don't
his
really know about that.
I don't know. Yeah, I feel the same though. I think there was a clear pace difference. I think during the race sometimes it's so hard, and I can't imagine what it would be like to be on the pit wall looking at those numbers and being the one to make that call and say we have more than half the race left, but like there's no way you're going to catch them. And to make those strategy decisions because it's difficult. It's I don't know. It just that is one of the really unique things about Formula 1 versus any other sport because it's both a team and an individual sport. And
Yeah.
it is, I think someone's gonna write in and be like, actually, there's this sport that you completely forgot about that is also exactly the same. But I think it is one of the few things, car racing in general that has that, where it is a like IndyCar does the same thing. You know, it is a team sport, but also a an individual sport. And so when you make those calls, it's like, okay, it's the same conversation about Alex and Logan, just at a different side of things where you're ultimately deciding who is outperforming the other one and you still have to both finish the race. It is the one thing I don't think I would be able to stomach because you're just in the middle of a performance telling someone you got to get out of the way.
Yeah. And it's also like the cost of being wrong is if they did all of that and it didn't work out for Lando, it would have been so bad for them because
Yeah.
it's Oscar's home race. But I don't know, even at the end in the interview, he did say like it was the right choice
Mhm.
and he was satisfied with where he was. So really, I don't think it matters at the end of the day what the fans think if the
Yeah.
drivers themselves are happy. And that like teammate dynamic between them, I think is quite unique because they're always happy regardless of like who swaps and who goes
Yeah.
in front. So
I think they have a good
yeah.
understanding between each other and like I also think there's a difference between team orders that are, like, prioritizing, like, to be fair, when you look back at, like, the Lewis and Valtteri era, there were team orders that technically Valtteri should have been able to stay and win, like, a race or take a certain position, and they swapped for the good of Lewis's championship or, you know, the strategy was let Valtteri do a lot of, like, the work and then let Lewis take certain points. And so sometimes I think those are harder to stomach than something like this where you look at it and you're like very objectively Lando had better pace. It made more sense. He didn't ultimately end up catching Charles, but I think you could see in the lap times like he was hunting. He just didn't get there.
Mm.
If he had had some more
Yeah.
laps, it's
Couple more
possible.
laps, I think you would have made it.
Yeah.
But either way, I think the whole Oscar and Lando debate has always been so like you see it on Twitter. If you open Twitter during a race, I think mine is just like tailored to McLaren fans because I
Mm.
am one. But that everyone is fighting, everyone's saying like, oh, like they shouldn't have done this. And then the other half of the fans are saying, like, no, 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 like Lando has always been better. It is what it is. And it's just everyone going crazy. But at the end of the day, like it worked out. And I think in this era of like F1 right now, we don't have like multiple teams fighting for the championship anyways.
Yeah.
So like team orders are never really for the great good of the championship because they're not fighting for it. So
Yeah.
right now it's like the teammates are all more friendly. Everyone's more friendly. So Doesn't
Yeah,
really matter. I don't know.
I think you're right. I think there's like an energy of, again, this race aside, there's just this like energy of, well, none of us are gonna win, so we might as well like have a good time while we while we fight for a
Yeah,
second, you know?
exactly. Let's fight for vibes, not
Yeah.
for the championship.
Yeah, make love,
So
not
sad.
war. Like that's the energy it feels like, you know?
No, exactly.
But yeah, I do think you're right though. I think like Lando and Oscar specifically have a really interesting dynamic to me because I think like when you look at other dynamics, there's an extreme amount of competition that is just like I don't care about this other person or there's different levels of it
Mm.
where you're always, as in an individual sport, especially when you're like fighting for your own seat, you're going to try to put yourself first. And I think Lando and Oscar are one of the teams that seems to have the least amount of animosity between each other, like in terms of that competition
Yeah.
level. So I like it. I love to watch their little videos. They're great on social media. They're
Yeah.
good in the
They
car.
have a good PR dynamic. It works out.
They
Works out for
really do.
everyone.
I love it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, they're good guys. Good team. They are my IndyCar team is McLaren as well. So every once in a while I'm like, it's okay. Good job, guys. Good work, Lando. And Lando really had a week. Chicken shop date, P3.
Oh yeah.
What a
Chicken shop
time.
date was, yeah, eventful. I think I'm still kind of shocked that even happened, I grew
Yeah.
up, well, I mean, I did grow up watching it. It's quite a new show, but like
Yeah.
ever since it's started coming out, I'm a very big Chicken Shop Date fan.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought it up actually, because I think it's the fact we had Lando Norris on it is crazy. And have you seen like the interactions between, the lady that does it, Amelia, and Lando, like on Instagram
Yes.
and TikTok? I loved it. That's so funny. And when he tweeted something like, we're over, you didn't follow me back. Very iconic. I'm a big fan.
You know what I will say? Actually, there was like a lot of conversation online about like, oh, everyone's gonna know who Lando Norris is now, and like, not everyone did this, which thankfully, but it was the first wave I saw when it was announced for sure that he was doing Chicken Shop Date. There was this wave of like, now we can't get Lando Norris, and some of them were jokes and some of them were really serious. Like, oh, we're gonna have like a new wave of fans that only know him from Chicken Shop Date. And I was like, for me, I think it's interesting because when you talk about athletes in general, it's sort of the same thing we were talking about with Lewis Hamilton. Like, is he bigger than Formula One? When you talk about Formula One specifically, it's not this like sport where everyone, if you talk to someone on the street, like, oh, do you know who Lando Norris is? Most people are not going to know the answer to that question unless they are a fan of Formula One. And I think that is the case with most sports. Like, I don't think if you stop most people on the street and ask them the name of like a different, like a specific hockey player that's playing right now that um isn't one of the legends that everyone kind of knows their name, there's like this level of where sports and athletes start to break into pop culture, and I personally always think it's good for the sport when that happens. And there are legends in a way that like it doesn't matter if you follow sports, like Michael Jordan. If you say Michael Jordan, doesn't matter if you've ever watched a basketball game in your life, the person that you stop is going to know who Michael Jordan is. Same with LeBron James. Not necessarily the same with Scottie Pippen. Like, even though Scottie Pippen is,
I don't know who that is.
see, that's it. Yeah, you proved my point. So like, just like a aside, Scottie Pippen is the person that played with Michael Jordan for all of his all of his championships. He's the right hand guy.
Okay.
Like, you know what I mean? So he is, when you ask Michael Jordan, like, could you have done it without Scottie Pippen? He said a million times no, but you know who Michael Jordan is, you don't know who Scottie Pippen is. And I think when we start to see athletes like Lewis Hamilton break outside of the I only know you because you drive Formula One, or people know Lewis Hamilton and don't know anything about Formula One. And now there are going to be people who know Lando Norris because he was on Chicken Shop Date and don't know anything about Formula One. And like, do 10% of those people start watching Formula One and become fans? That's great. Like, I think it's the same argument about Drive to Survive. And I'm curious to see in this like new era that's run by Liberty Media, do we start to see some of these drivers become well-known figures outside of the sport? And does that help the sport continue to grow? Because I do think Formula One has the smallest number of like names that people would know worldwide.
Yeah.
Whether they know the sport or not.
See, I think like it's interesting because I'd say it's a little bit different in Europe. I'd say because we're very like Formula One is a bit bigger here.
Yeah.
We probably know, if you said like Charles Leclerc to anyone, they'd probably have heard of him somewhere. also in the era of like, I hate to say it, but like TikTok edits,
Mm,
everyone's seen like everyone and their mother has seen a Charles Leclerc edit on
yeah,
TikTok at some point.
yeah,
So I'd say here, like maybe it is already kind of getting there,
yeah,
but you know, we could always have more. I think Chicken Shop Date is like a step in the right direction for sure.
yeah,
Because like the
yeah.
more fans we have, the better, always.
I think it's also because I would say like even like soccer is not really, and it's not soccer to you, but
Football, yeah.
football. When I say football, I'm always nervous. People are going to think I'm talking about the NFL, which is not what I'm talking about. But so like football or soccer, depending on where you are, is obviously not as big of a deal here. But I would say that like if you say the name Messi or you say David Beckham, like most people are going to know who those people are. So I kind of think it's the same thing. It's like basketball is such an American sport, but you know who Michael Jordan is. Soccer and Formula One are such a kind of I hesitate to say Formula One's a European sport or soccer is a European sport because obviously there are other countries like where those sports are really big, a really big deal. It's not necessarily an American centric sport, but like those big names, we do know them over here. And so I'm excited to see which Formula One drivers become those names as well, because I think it'll be someone in the same debate about like, is Lewis bigger than the sport? Someone pointed out, which I'm sure I'm going to start, a debate. It's a controversial take. It wasn't my take. It was someone in my comments. They were saying before Lewis Hamilton was Michael Schumacher, and most, if you like, the same people who know who Lewis Hamilton is may not know who Michael Schumacher is. It's an interesting take because obviously Michael Schumacher is such a big name in the sport. He did so much in the sport, but I don't know, especially because it was pre-social media, that he became a global icon in every country where everyone would know who he is. Versus Lewis Hamilton has been able to do that. We're gonna see Lando's reach on this one sort of silly kind of comedic thing. But also like Daniel Ricciardo is on like late night television as a guest from time to time. Like I think we're seeing more of like this attempt to make them global stars in every large market as opposed to just focusing on like where the sport has historically been popular.
For sure. Yep.
So it'll be interesting. And I hope Amelia has a really big hand in that. Get all of the drivers on Chicken Shop Date.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. I think she should start a series, just F1 drivers on Chicken Shop Date.
Honestly, same.
That's the dream.
And if she needs help, I'm available to do anything. Wipe the sweat off her
Honestly,
brow.
yeah.
What can you need?
I will do anything. I'll fry the chicken, you know?
Yeah.
I'm here.
You know what I mean? I'll listen from the kitchen. I'm available. Call us, Amelia.
Please get us on there.
The last little thing about Chicken Shop Date, I think their humor matched so well. Yeah, I think like on the show itself, generally people kind of follow her, but when we see her kind of break out and do things like host red carpets, every once in a while these celebrities just don't know how to follow her sense of humor. They're very off put by it. And there's this horrible clip. I was really impressed with the way she handled it, but there's this horrible clip of Stellan Skarsgård being interviewed by her, and she just asked a normal question. She was like, what's your favorite memory on set? It was a completely normal question to have asked. And he groaned and was like, I think the way she said was, do you have a favorite memory from set? And he groaned and was like, I hate that question. That's such a TikTok question. You're just looking for like a sound bite that you can quickly clip and put everywhere. And she was like, I was so impressed, and I may be slightly paraphrasing what she said, but she was like, you could just say, I think she said, so the answer is no. It's like
she's so real.
She's so funny. But it's like, bro, like just because she is on social media, I found it fascinating because I was like, what do you think red carpet interviews are? It doesn't matter if it's for or for like a television broadcast. It's always short, kind of superficial questions because you have to move. It's 4 seconds. Like you have 4 seconds with this guy. Maybe he's been given the tiny microphone one too many times and he hates it. But it was just, I was just so frustrated with it because I was like, what are you doing? But I think Amelia really knows how to manage it and knows how to handle it. And so like watching her have a good person to balance off of with Lando, I was really happy that it worked out.
I kind of saw it coming though, because they're both British, they're both sarcastic. Like, it couldn't have gone wrong. Which was great.
Yeah. It could have.
I'd love to see like Lance Stroll on there. Do you know what I mean? I feel like that would be I would love to see that.
I'm like imagining that now, and I really want to see it. I really do.
Just his like casual sassy comments paired with her. We need to see it.
I agree. I also feel like I would love to see more chances for Lance to show his personality because I do think he's so
Mm,
genuinely entertaining. And a
yeah.
lot of times because of like who his dad is and everyone's feelings about it, like a lot of times we only focus on the moments of him getting mad in the garage, which like every driver's done. That was from obviously from last season, but like he's been pretty calm this season, I would say. But we're always focusing on like the negatives with him, and I feel like if we could have a little bit more of his personality more often, he could beat some of the allegations. That's what I'll say.
Oh, for sure. I think that one clip where he's talking about how much he loves dinner, I think he definitely gained like quite a few fans from that. Oh, I love him so much.
I really do. I really like him.
Very underrated.
He really is.
Okay.
I really enjoy him. So to come back to our team dynamic conversation, we've only kind of talked about the positive at McLaren dynamic, but one I do think we have to talk about is the situation at VCarb between Yuki and Danny Rick, because it has been tense, not just this week. Like I think last race as well, we've had some moments where it's like the competition is fierce between the two of them right now.
I think it's really interesting because when you put their personalities together, like when I imagine them as teammates, I always thought they'd get along really well because
Mm,
they both seem kind of like, it feels weird to say, but like unserious in a way.
mm,
I thought they'd have like a
yeah.
good dynamic, Daniel being like the experienced one, Yuki being the newer one. But now the way it's turned out, I didn't really expect that at all.
Yeah.
But, I think it comes with the whole Red Bull debate on, is one of them going to get the seat?
Mhm.
I think it's definitely driving a lot of competition down at VCarb, as they say. I don't know. I think the past few races, it's been kind of evident that they're a bit more closely matched than people were expecting,
Yeah.
because Daniel has not been as far ahead as people kind of wanted him to be. And that's probably driving tensions in the team. What would you say about it?
I feel like the thing with Yuki, I love to look at it as sort of like a, like a revenge, like a villain era edit, because it feels like for so long people have just been telling him he's never going to be good enough to get to Red Bull. There's been a lot of conversation about like his salary being paid by Honda. The only reason he has that seat is because Honda wants a Japanese driver. Honda does have like a history of that, not just in F1 but in other racing series. Like there is an expectation to have a Japanese driver in one of the seats. Um, and I think it's similar to the conversation we've had about Lance Stroll, where it's just like there's a level of constant discussion about you don't really deserve to be here. And Danny's always going to be better than you. And I think there's like a desire to prove that wrong, and he is driving to prove that wrong. Um,
Yeah.
and I wonder how much of the tension is like actually between the two of them, and how much of it is the fact that they know that there's only like there is this conversation happening. Like if there wasn't a lot of press or conversation or comparison, would they be so volatile with each other? I don't know, to be honest. I think a lot of it is this like you're responding to people talking about you just blatantly to your face. You know what I mean? It's not even like, oh,
Yeah.
talking behind your back. It's like as soon as you get out of the car, they're like, so Yuki, how do you feel being worse than everyone else on the team? And it's like he's not necessarily.
No, exactly.
um,
Exactly.
yeah.
There's a very big, I'd say in the media, there's always been like a big like Daniel bias for sure, because they really
Yeah.
love his personality out there. And every time Yuki does anything, they're like, oh, here goes Yuki again, yelling on the radio, doing this, doing that. And I
Yeah.
think he's really like determined to prove this is the year. This is gonna be, I hope it's his year.
I
Like
do too.
he
I will
deserves
say
something.
I'm flip-flopping too, because I'll say earlier in the year I was complaining about Yuki and his attitude, and when he sort of kind of dive bombed in the cool down lap with Daniel.
Yeah.
I was very vocal about the fact that I thought that was out of line, and um that I think Yuki has to figure it out. But I do think maybe the answer is that Yuki just needs to do what he did this week, which is just prove yourself through your driving. Stop trying
Mm.
to kind of have the last word. I honestly think Yuki, if he can do what he did this weekend, which is like not respond to any sort of goading comments and just drive better than Daniel, I think you fix it, Like I think you kind of prove that you earned it.
I think the question is really though is whether they'll ever let Yuki have that Red Bull seat. I don't know. I have a feeling that because he is like that Honda driver and he's like not really part of it very much. He's not really in the talks of ever getting that seat.
I personally don't think that there is a conversation about him moving into that seat, and I also think that it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2026 when Honda ends their relationship and Ford takes back over, because I do wonder, regardless of Yuki's performance, does the Red Bull organization want him there at all? Like, or is it just out of obligation? And does it matter how well he performs to get there? Because I just personally don't think there's ever been this indication of looking at him for that move up, that Red Bull seat to take it over. I do think Danny is kind of throwing his chance away to do that, because I think it was sort of agreed. It felt like as soon as this season's over, as long as Daniel doesn't kind of crash his car every race, like he'll be taking that seat and they'll move someone else into the V carb seat. And then eventually, like, I think Yuki will stay for the Honda relationship. And then I think the plan everyone sort of seemed to think it was Danny moves up into Checo's seat, Checo leaves, and maybe we bring in like Liam Lawson into Danny's seat, which I think would be great. But I also sort of feel like maybe Danny, I hate to say it, it might be the last year, guys.
Yeah, I do. I also do think it might be over for him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I really thought there'd be a bigger difference between him and Yuki, and the fact that there isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was a big difference this week. It just was the opposing,
the wrong way.
the wrong direction.
Unfortunately, it was the wrong way. I think it's interesting how their social media always like portrays it as like Daniel like fought really hard, like he did amazingly, he did his best, and I'm like, it's interesting that they put it like that, and then with Yuki they don't really have the same bias. They don't give him anything. So
I agree. I
Yeah.
think, like, I will say the first time I felt like the social media was like, okay, Yuki, you can have it. They posted a picture of like the results, and it had Yuki like with his little championship kind of like cheer with one fist up.
Yeah.
And then Daniel just sort of looks like, sorry. Like, it's like, it looks like a kid being reprimanded. Like,
The graphics are so like funny when you think about, they must have had them both stand there and be like, do happy face, do sad face, do like a shocked face. Like, very unserious.
I'll tell you, weirdly, like, sports media day is one of my favorite things. Regardless of the sport, I find it so fascinating because it is the one time, like the one day where these athletes have to be like kind of press oriented, which I think athletes generally are not interested in like having their picture taken or like doing these different silly moves. And the reason why those pictures make me laugh every time is because it is what you're saying. Like, there is a day where everybody comes in, puts their little uniforms on, and is told, walk to the camera and turn to your side and cheer. Now, cheer on your left, cheer on your right, look sad. Like, and they have to come up with all of the different versions that they might need for a result. And it's so funny to me because when you watch, sometimes social media teams will post a little bit of video from it. And every once in a while, like, an athlete will do something really funny with it. Like, Jimmy Butler does a lot of funny stuff with the NBA, where he like this year dressed up like My Chemical Romance. Like, he did like a fake lip and a fake eyebrow piercing and like straightened his hair and looked ridiculous, painted his nails, did guy liner, and like that's his situation for that's all of the pictures for the season. And so it's the same with watching these. Like, every time I see them, I'm like, that was a whole day where someone was like, please look like you just lost a race. Oh, how sad. Like,
I love
so
social
fun.
media.
I love it.
What an era we live in.
It's also the same, like, when you watch on TV and you see them do those little animated videos where they're like, Yuki Tsunoda, and he like cheers or like like walks towards the camera and turns. Just so silly to think about these high performance athletes like in a room with a green screen being told, please walk at a measured pace. Nope, that was too fast.
Walk a little closer to the camera.
My dream. I would love to be involved in that. If people are like, what's your dream job? I want to tell people, nope, that was too fast. Walk a little bit slower in front of the green screen. Thank you.
Honestly, if I could figure out how to get into that, I would do it.
I think it's just definitely a joyful day. What a joyful day of work.
Yeah.
I also sometimes think like it has to be similar to doing like kids portraits at like a Bloomingdale's or like however people, like when you take kids to go get their like little tooth and they're like, smile over here, look at the little giraffe. Like, you have to be like, that's not big enough, smile bigger. Okay, the last really big event of the race was George's crash, which I don't know if you saw. ESPN posted that every one of Carlos's wins, George has crashed on either the first or the final lap. They posted the picture of Carlos on the podium, and then beneath that, George's
Oh
crash,
dear.
and it's like a try situation. It is
Yeah.
hard to look at, but I am fascinated. Do you think is it are they connected by the missing appendix? Do they only have to,
Maybe.
you know?
It's crazy. I don't know. I think like the similarities between this one and even like Singapore,
Mhm.
Lando on the podium. There's like that one bit where Lando and Carlos hug at the end of the race. The whole like it was
Yeah.
like the same thing again. It was crazy. But
Yeah.
with George's crash, like I don't know. It was a bit of a weird one. There's a lot to think about with, I think, George's crash, especially because, like, I feel like in the previous times when he did crash, like, say, in like Silverstone
Mm.
and again in Singapore last year, it was kind of like his fault in a way. Like, we did
Yeah.
see it. Well, I mean, yeah, we did see it happen. But I think with this one, I don't really know exactly how it happened or like how it ended up the way it did. But I feel like we were watching the race, it was happening, and then suddenly there's just like George's car like 2D on its side. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, how did this happen?
So yeah, I think my first reaction when it happened, I was like, I can't believe George did this again. I know that's brutal. It's just so much harder to watch it on the final lap of the race. It's like you're almost there, and I'd rather you came in and you didn't pass Fernando than to fight for it and crash the car and just completely DNF. We went for no points for Mercedes this week, and I
Yeah.
just don't even know how to process that statement. But I will say, to be fair to George, after the fact, we did have the FIA did come out and say, like, "Yep, it was a penalty on Fernando's side. He was given a 20-second penalty for brake testing." I don't wanna misquote Fernando, so I'm gonna read it, but on Instagram, he responded to the penalty, so I'll just read it straight out. This is what Fernando said. This is not me paraphrasing. So Fernando says, "Double points for the team and a better race pace than the rest of the weekend allowed us to cross the finish line in 6th and 7th place. A bit surprised by a penalty at the end of the race regarding how we should approach the corners or how we should drive the race cars. At no point do we want to do anything wrong at these speeds. I believe that without gravel on the corner on any other corner in the world, we will never be even investigated. In F1, with over 20 years of experience, the epic duels like Imola 2005, 2006, Brazil 2023, changing race lines, sacrificing entry speed to have good exits from corners is part of the art of motorsport. We never drive at 100% every race lap and every corner. We save fuel, tires, brakes. So being responsible for not making every lap the same is a bit surprising. We have to accept it and think about Japan to have more pace and fight for positions further up the field. Thank you, team." I thought his response was really interesting because it was a pretty intense response to the penalty. And obviously it sucks for him to get that. But then I also watched Bernie Collins and her kind of breakdown of what happened, which was, I will say, if you're listening to it and you don't follow Bernie Collins on Instagram, you should go check this video out because I think she's going to explain it far more like eloquently than I'm going to, but I'm going to do my best. And so essentially with that, what we had and what she explained, to my understanding, is that on this lap, on this corner, Fernando hit his brakes about 100 meters with a differential of 100 meters of how he had been taking that lap, which is then going to cause a kind of heavy reaction from George behind him, trying to sort of deal with the change in the racing line, which the argument there is that that is what then caused him to spin out because he was reacting to that, hit the gravel. And then the other thing was the reason why George was on his side was because the wheel came off and then actually bent underneath, which caused him to tip. So it looked pretty nasty. It was obviously a pretty nasty crash, but ultimately I think it wasn't as bad as it looked necessarily because it wasn't like he flipped the car. It was just the way that it came under, the way the wheel came under just tipped him onto his side. Um, so thankfully he's okay. But I guess what is fascinating to me, I don't think I know enough because I've never driven an F1 car and I've never like looked at how these numbers work and been able to process that amount of data. But it sounds like to some degree it kind of was Fernando's fault. Like George would have to at such a high speed have to respond to such a different um racing line and such a different like path of the driver in front of him. But at the same time, I do wonder if like the argument is that a better driver or a more skillful driver, a more experienced driver would have been able to adjust for that without crashing.
I mean, I definitely think that's true, but I'd like even in the video that Bernie Collins mentioned, it's that 100 meters is like a big differential for
Yeah.
like what they did. And I guess it's the same like when you're on the road yourself and you're like on the highway or the freeway, I don't know what you guys call it in America, but if someone in front of you brakes suddenly, then it takes you like a minute to adjust. And I
Adjust, yeah.
don't know if like any experience would make you be able to predict that necessarily.
Yeah.
Because if he was doing the same thing for like 50 laps, let's say, and then suddenly he does something different, it's not like anyone could really predict that.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then he says Fernando again is like strict on his word as always, and he's very sure that he didn't do anything wrong. So
Yeah. I do think
it
it's
is what it is.
I do think his response when I read it, I was like, and now reading it again, it sort of comes off as like, let's see you do it. You know what I mean? Like, let's see you get in this car and do what I just did. And I get that, but I also I think both sides kind of have an argument. It's hard to say what the truth of the situation is. Like you're saying, in any situation, if someone breaks suddenly in front of you in an extreme differential and 100 meters at that pace is a a very big difference. And so I think when you're coming, and it's also 100 meters going into a turn, like you're coming through, and I'm saying, I love how I'm talking about this. Like, oh yeah, I drive Formula One cars all the time, and this is how I would do it. I race on the sim racer all the time. Anyway, but like when you're coming, you're coming around that same lap so many times that it really is at that point, like you've done that race, that at the end of the race, you're on your final lap. You've done it so much that your muscle memory knows where the turn is, where to brake, all of these different things. If very suddenly the person in front of you now changes that pace, that changes that race, and you have to adjust for it, I I as I said, my first reaction was, "George, what are you doing?" But now having, like, taken in all of the data, people will be shocked to know that I sort of feel like it wasn't his fault.
Yeah. I don't know. I did think it was a bit strange that Fernando decided on the last lap that he suddenly needed a better exit out of the turn.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would suddenly decide that. I
I don't
don't
know.
know.
It's also interesting to say, like, I don't know that George would have caught him anyway, like, if this hadn't
Yeah.
happened. He was obviously chasing him down, and it was enough for this move to he was close enough for this move to have caused the crash, but, um, it was I don't know, I just I would have liked to have seen it in a cleaner way, obviously. I never wanna see anyone crash, so,
Yeah.
um,
I think, like, on that note, George's radio, when he actually did crash, I don't know if you heard it,
yeah.
but when he was, like, screaming for a red flag, I think that was also quite interesting.
I was
I don't know.
really sad watching I was really scared for him
Mhm.
because when I was watching the race itself, they cut to Lewis in the garage and he looked really scared. Like the garage team looked like very
Yeah.
alarmed. And now having heard the radio, it's because that's what they were hearing in their headphones. They were hearing him like beg for a red flag. Um, and I don't understand why there wasn't one, to be honest, because it was on a it was a blind turn, like, anybody's coming around full speed. I don't know how I mean, hopefully, their engineers are radioing them, and obviously, thankfully, nothing happened, but he really was, like, in the middle of the track, and there was no way for him to get out of the car.
Yeah. And I think, like, for sure, because it's understandable because it's the last lap of the race, they didn't want to red flag it and do the
Yeah,
whole thing. But I saw a lot of people saying, like, oh, George just wants to keep his points. Like, if you don't need the red flag. But I do think in a situation where you're like that, you can't, like, he mentioned that he couldn't see anything around him. He doesn't
yeah,
know who's coming. Like, it must be so terrifying to be just like stranded there in the middle of a track. So, yeah, I don't know. I do think they should have called a red flag. But at the end of the day, everyone is safe.
yeah.
So,
Everyone's thankfully safe. I think I'm
yeah.
I was surprised that they didn't and I think in the race itself, I didn't think about it until I was, like, worried that he was okay, but everyone was crossing the finish line, and so, like, the coverage just sort of went back and forth, um, and it did seem like he was okay, so I could see if you were not aware of it, but I feel like the stewards are are aware of the fact that there is a man prone in the center of the track. I don't
Yeah.
know. I was scared for him, but I'm happy he's okay, ultimately.
Yeah. Worked out in the end.
Yeah. I would say, like, look up the radio if you want, but it could be quite to be honest, distressing if that type of thing scares you. Like,
Yeah,
I will say you might
for sure. Be careful.
be careful. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I always feel like the safety parts of it are so hard because obviously they now have determined that it was a they've penalized Fernando for it, but they didn't give him like the safe exit they could have given him. But I get it. It's the final lap. They wanted to let everyone just kind of finish the race, but I don't know. Rough. I have to say, we have finally made it to the end of the race. We have been talking for almost 2 hours, which is, I guess, just goes to show you that we've finally had an exciting race for the first time in like a long time. We had a lot to talk about. I will say that I want to talk a little bit about kind of like Carlos and the post race interviews and post race press because my favorite quote from the whole weekend is "I'm still jobless, so maybe this will help."
I love
I-
Carlos.
and my favorite tweet of the night was definitely Carlos Sainz is driving like he has no appendix and no job, and I really respect that. But I think it's almost funny how much of a joke he's making out of it. Like there's this energy. I think we all kind of understand that if anyone was going to take your job, Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen, what can you say about that if a team has a chance to get either of those drivers? And I think there's been a lot of conversation. Like I keep seeing these points where people are like, Ferrari must be regretting their decision by now. And to be honest with you, when we talk about it from like an economic standpoint, there is no regretting the benefit that they got from the move. Like the amount that Ferrari stock went up worldwide, the amount of money that they're going to make, even if Lewis doesn't win again, there's just an economic value to having Lewis on your team. I do think there's no question that Carlos gets a seat somewhere next year. I just am not sure where. I think there's a lot of options.
I think the fact he's being so like nonchalant about it in a way, like there are people in his phone that are calling him
Oh,
about
for sure.
these seats. Like, I think he'd be a lot more stressed out if he didn't have offers ready and waiting.
Yeah.
So
I think
he's in a place to negotiate, and he's enjoying it. So there we are.
Did you watch the post race press conference with Charles and Lando and Carlos?
I saw like clips of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
not the whole thing.
I don't know if you saw the clip where they asked Charles and Lando if they felt that Carlos was an underrated driver, which I think was a question that had been going around on social media. Someone posted that. And and like Charles basically was like essentially what you just said. He's like, he won't say it and he can't say it, but like obviously I know like team principals are calling him, people are courting him, he'll be fine. Like I think the exact way he said it was, I've always said I'm not worried about where Carlos is going to end up because he'll end up with a seat. And everybody kind of knows that Carlos is a great driver. It's really just like a question of where he'll end up. And I do wonder, the more he drives like this, like, do we see him end up kind of having his choice of whatever team he wants to go to? Do you have like a desire to see him in one specific place?
I mean, I think it would always be great to see him at Red Bull.
Yeah.
But obviously, the Max and Carlos duo didn't work before. I don't think it would work again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of people were saying that Red Bull are scouting him. But at the end of the day, between the dads of those two drivers, it's I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I'd love to see him at like Aston Martin, maybe. That would be nice to see.
Yeah.
No, what about you?
I would like to see him go somewhere that's going to put him first. And so I feel like Red Bull's not that place unless something happens where Max decides to leave. Like there's so many rumors of that. I don't see it happening, but if he does, then maybe. But I really feel like Carlos, like I guess to the underrated point, Carlos does have the quality of a first seat driver. And I would like to see him go somewhere where he gets that kind of chance. And so Aston Martin might be a spot for him to be able to do that. I don't know. I want to see him be happy. So wherever's going to make him be happy.
I think that's like honestly such an interesting perspective to me as well, because like, as I said, like I spend a lot of time on Twitter and they don't like Carlos there at all. And there's this like perspective that he's just not like worthy of being a first driver or like of really having a seat at all. But I'd argue like recently, maybe at some points in his career that's been true, but recently absolutely not. Like I think he's definitely got the potential we saw in like Singapore with his own like strategy calls and everything. Like he
Yeah.
could do it. He could
Yeah.
definitely do it.
That actually, I spend not a lot of time on Twitter, and so maybe that's why I don't have my perspective of that, like being the case.
Mm,
But it is I mean, sure, earlier in his career, but I feel like you can say that about anyone, like that they're
no,
not
exactly.
the best driver, but that's because they're getting used to it. So I feel like I don't know. For me, I feel like it's hard to argue after last season when you look at it and it's the only non-Red Bull win was Carlos. It's hard to say that he isn't this high caliber driver. I don't know. It wasn't a fluke. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
he really does know what he's doing.
No, exactly. A lot of people, they like to use the like gifted win term every time he wins something, and it's like it wasn't gifted. And I don't know. Silverstone is a different discussion, but like
Sure.
Singapore and Australia for sure, he
Yeah,
deserved those wins.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't know. My plea to the grid is just somewhere that is going to treat him right. That's all I would
Yeah.
like to see.
I was just gonna say he's also like getting old, so I think it's time in the nicest way. Like
That
he's
was
getting
so
old.
blunt. I love that. He's also getting old.
Yeah, it's like, he's gonna hit 30 soon. Like he's gotta be a number one driver. It's time.
It's time for him.
And
I
yeah,
feel. Yeah, I
it
agree
is
with
his
you.
time.
Yeah. He's coming in, he's maturing like a wine. Give him it's time for
Yeah.
his I don't know, like his reserve. Reserve's the wrong word, but in wine it would be reserve. It's he's up there. It's time. Give him what he deserves.
Yeah.
This also the other thing that is kind of exciting and obviously won't last next week. This will be completely over. But because of Max DNFing, the driver standings kind of are exciting now. We have Charles is only 4 points behind Max. Arguably, if Carlos had raced last week and everything had happened the same now, Carlos could potentially be like tied or above Max. Like there are the points for that to have been the case, kind of. Maybe would have depended on where he was at, but he would have been much closer. Also, Ferrari is only 4 points behind Red Bull in the constructors now, so it won't last, but it was exciting.
I don't know. It could last. I don't know. I think Checo said something where he was like, "Oh, even if Max had raced, there would have been a lot of fighting at the front."
I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a chance.
Yeah, I'm curious. It's too early to say, but I would love if, in theory, we get to the end and there's like a real fight for first between Ferrari and Red Bull. This is me manifesting using my new witchy energy.
Use that power. Hopefully, I'm gonna stay being delusional. It could happen.
It could.
It's all up in the air now. Yeah, I think there's definitely not going to be a fight for like drivers champion, but constructors, we could see
constructors. Yeah, we could see it for sure.
Maybe,
especially like if Checo continues to have a little bit of variation and fall further back, and Carlos and Charles continue to perform well, both like together every time, could be possible.
Yeah, I think that would be really beautiful for Carlos's last season at Ferrari for sure. Go out with a bang,
agree.
I
would love it. That segues perfectly into our next race and season predictions. We've now, I think, both said where we want Carlos to go. We've said what we want out of the Constructors Championship. Do you have any predictions for next race in Japan?
I think if anything, we're going to have Max back 30 seconds ahead. That is definitely happening.
Yeah.
I'd love to see. I had a lot of expectations for VCarb this season, and like in terms of their car itself. So I'd love to see maybe them place both cars in the points. Would be nice.
It'd be interesting. I would love to see it. I wonder if it will happen. I kind of I feel like every race this changes now. My season predictions. If you go back to the first week, you're gonna be like, so I don't know what Formula One you were watching, but I think VCarb, with Danny, I think I am gonna go ahead and say that I do think that this is gonna be a downfall season for him. I think what's hard, I don't see like the light or like the fire behind his eyes anymore of this. I feel like he fought to come back, he made it back, and I don't know, maybe he really is kind of done. I hope he proves me wrong. I really do. But I do sort of feel like when you listen to him talk and you watch him and you watch these drives, I don't see the drive anymore. I don't see the drive to survive. Okay.
Yeah, he's he's just surviving, really. I feel like that's the vibe I get from him.
He is, in
I don't know.
fact,
I'd love
getting
to see
there.
the fire in him.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'd also love to see, like, I think he would be very good off track. He's always shown he's been good off track, you know.
Yeah.
So maybe it is time for a younger driver in his seat.
Yeah.
You know, Liam Lawson. I'm a big Liam Lawson fan, so
Me too.
I'm advocating for that.
I really
So
would like to see
hopefully-
Liam next year in a seat.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't even care what seat it is. I would like to see Liam in a seat.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that is my big thing that I'm gonna commit to. I do think Danny's out and a rookie's in. Hopefully Liam.
Yeah. What is your thoughts on maybe them swapping out Logan for next year?
I think
Are we
it
seeing that happen?
I think it will probably happen. But I also will be honest with you, I felt like he wasn't coming back this year. I really felt like all signs pointed to
too.
that. And so it's hard to say because in the Williams camp, there are options. There's so many things that could happen. And I do think if Williams doesn't re-sign Logan, there's no way someone else does, obviously. So it's like it's sort of Williams or nowhere. We had this conversation like last race when I had James Coker on, and we were talking about sort of like the different things that each driver brings to the camp. So there's this argument that like rookies really should be getting in, and certain people have seats that they don't deserve, or all these different things. And we were talking about it in the context of Lance because so many people are so anti-Lance for those reasons. But when you go all the way down the grid, everybody brings something beyond just their driver capabilities, and most of those things are money related. So like we've talked a lot about Yuki and his relationship with Honda, and there's the same thing can be said all the way down. We've talked about Lewis's economic value, and we've talked about kind of Fernando's value as well. And so you can say the same thing about everyone. And so with Logan, there is a benefit to the American market. There is a benefit from his family money. Like there are certain aspects that he brings to the team. I just don't know how long those outweigh points.
Yeah.
So
for sure. I think for a team like Williams as well, like every single point counts, you know.
Exactly.
Like they need it.
Yeah. It is the one thing I will say that I could see happening in the argument that they could make for him to have one more season. I don't think we'll see him signed to like a multi-year contract at all. I think he'll continue to be like if he gets a contract, it continues to be a 1-year contract. But the one argument they could make, which I could see, is that saying like our issues were really our team problems, like our funding problems. Because the fact that they didn't have a spare chassis, the fact that this is the first they have a new wheel this year, like they just are really behind in developing the car and developing their plans. And so I do wonder, do they sort of weigh that and say like part of the issue isn't necessarily Logan's fault? He is trying to get there. Can we get him there? I don't know. I think it'll depend to see if like the rest of the season we start to see him pick it up. We'll see.
For sure.
Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you for hanging out with me.
Thank you for having me. It's been long but good.
It has. It's been a great time. Shreya, where can people find you on the internet if they want to see your hot takes in general about this Formula One?
Just Shreya F1 everywhere. So TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Yeah.
Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you for hanging out with me. If you are listening, make sure to give Shreya a follow and hang out with her on the internet as well. And thanks again for hanging out with me, Shreya.
Thank you so much for having me.
As always, if you don't want to watch these races alone or the F1 races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.